The klaxon at CFB Cold Lake doesn't just wake you up, it stops your heart. At 0342 AM, amidst a blinding blizzard in northern Alberta, the concept of peace vanishes in a single mechanical scream. This is an Alpha Scramble. Inside the hardened shelters, pilots aren't just running. They are racing against a timeline measured in seconds, knowing that every delay brings a nuclear payload closer to the North American border. As the canopy of the CF-188 Hornet slams shut, sealing up the -30-degree bite, the pilot callsign Hammer watches his displays flicker to life. Twin GE engines ignite, dumping raw fuel into the exhaust, turning the frozen runway into a streak of blue fire and violence. He is launching into the void to intercept a ghost, a massive radar contact moving at 450 knots that NORAD has tagged as Zombie. But as Hammer punches through the cloud deck, his cockpit is suddenly bathed in the terrifying red glow of the radar warning receiver. The Zombie isn't just flying, it's hunting. The enemy has turned on their fire control radar, and for the first time in decades, the Interceptor has become the target. To understand why a Canadian pilot is risking his life in a blizzard at 0300 AM, you have to look at the globe from the top down. The Arctic isn't just ice and polar bears. It is the back door to the North American continent. The shortest flight path for a nuclear missile traveling from Engels Air Base in Russia to Washington, D.C. or New York isn't across the Atlantic, it is directly over the North Pole through Canadian airspace. For decades, this frozen frontier has been the stage for a high-stakes game of geopolitical chicken, a contest of wills where the pieces move at Mach 0.8. The Russian Long-Range Aviation Command resumed these strategic bomber patrols in 2007 after a post-Cold War hiatus. But in recent years, the flights have evolved from routine navigation training into aggressive combat simulations. They aren't just flying, they are probing. By sending Tu-95 milliseconds bear bombers to the edge of the Air Defense Identification Zone, ADIZ, Moscow is testing the reaction time of the North American Aerospace Defense Command, NORAD. They want to know how fast can the Canadians scramble, how far out can their radar see, and most importantly, will their aging CF-188 fleet function when the temperature drops below the freezing point of hydraulic fluid. Tonight's mission profile is particularly sinister. The Russians chose to fly during a severe winter storm, a calculated move to stress test the human and mechanical limits of the Royal Canadian Air Force. Launching an intercept in clear skies is standard procedure. Launching one into a blinding snow squall with zero visibility is a nightmare. This isn't just a patrol, it is a question posed in the language of military force. By pushing their bombers into the storm, the Kremlin is asking if the West's northern shield has rusted. But as the CF-18s climbed through 2,000 feet, leaving the storm below, the real question emerges: are these bombers merely practicing a launch profile, or are they carrying the real thing? Long before the pilots at Cold Lake were jolted awake, the invisible sentries of the Arctic had already picked up the scent. The North Warning System, a chain of unmanned AN/FPS 117 long-range radars strung across the frozen spine of Canada like a digital tripwire, detected the anomalies first. These weren't subtle stealth fighters. The Tu-95 Bear has the radar cross-section of a flying barn, its massive counter-rotating propellers churning the air and reflecting radar waves like a disco ball. Deep inside the Cheyenne Mountain complex in Colorado, the data fused instantly with satellite feeds showing heat signatures leaving Engels Air Base in western Russia hours prior. The intercept was mathematically inevitable, the only variable was time. But launching an intercept in the high north is a logistical high-wire act. The CF-188 Hornet, a twin-engine fighter designed in the late 1970s, is a sprinter, not a marathon runner. To reach the ADIZ boundary and stay there long enough to escort the intruders, it needs a lifeline. That lifeline is the CC-150 Polaris tanker, a converted Airbus airliner filled with 1,000,000 pounds of jet fuel orbiting in the freezing dark hundreds of miles behind the fighters. Without this gas station in the sky, the Hornets would run dry and plunge into the ice before they even saw the target. Inside the cockpit, the pilot callsign Hammer is strapped into an ejection seat that was built before he was born. The airframe of his Hornet has logged thousands of hours of stress, its metal skin expanding and contracting in the extreme thermal cycles of the Canadian climate. Yet despite its age, the jet has been gutted and rewired with 21st century eyes. The APG-73 radar sweeps the volume of airspace ahead, cutting through the electronic noise of the storm. He checks his fuel flow, his oxygen system, and the master arm switch. The intercept geometry is closing rapidly. The Zombie is no longer just a green symbol on screen, it is a physical reality waiting in the clouds. But as the range counter drops below 40 miles, Hammer has to wonder, is the Russian crew just flying a navigation leg, or have they brought their own fighter escorts to turn this into a 2-on-2 dogfight? At 2,800 feet, the CF-18 breaks through the cloud tops into the stark, moonlit clarity of the stratosphere. The radar display in Hammer's cockpit shows the contact at 12 miles and closing fast. Tally-ho, he breathes into the mask. The target is visual. It is a silhouette that has haunted NATO nightmares since 1956, the Tupolev Tu-95 milliseconds bear. As the Hornet pulls alongside the intruder, the sheer scale of the machine becomes impressive. It is a silver-skinned giant, swept wing and bristling with antennas. But it is the sound that hits first. The Tu-95 is the only strategic bomber in the world, powered by turboprops driving massive four-blade contra-rotating propellers that spin at supersonic tip speeds. The noise is not a hum. It is a physical thrumming that vibrates through the canopy of the CF-18, a low-frequency resonance that you feel in your chest, even over the roar of your own jet engines. Hammer eases the throttle back, matching speed at 400 knots, drifting to the starboard wing position, the standard intercept protocol. He can see the flash of the anti-collision strobes reflecting off the bear's aluminum skin. He can even see the helmet of the Russian tail gunner in the rear turret tracking him. This is supposed to be a routine meet and greet, a professional escort out of the ADIZ. Then, the world changes. A high-pitched warbling screech erupts in Hammer's headset. The radar warning receiver RWR, the fuzzbuster of the fighter jet, lights up the cockpit with a terrifying red strobe. The symbology on the azimuth display shifts instantly from a passive search track to a hard pulsing diamond. This is the signal. Spike music on Hammer yells his hand, instinctively tightening on the stick, thumb hovering over the chaff and flare dispense button. The Russians aren't just looking around with navigational radar. They have activated the box-tail fire control radar at the rear of the bomber. They are painting the Canadian fighter with a continuous wave beam, the electronic precursor to a radar-guided gun solution. This is a massive escalation. In the polite rules of aerial intercept, you do not lock up the police officer pulling you over. It is the equivalent of a driver pointing a loaded shotgun at a highway patrolman. The Tu-95 has turned from a trespasser into a direct threat. Hammer's heart rate spikes to 140. Is this a mistake, a malfunctioning switch in the vintage bomber, or is the tail gunner trying to provoke a kinetic response, daring the Canadian to flinch? For 10 agonizing seconds, the RWR screams the lock warning, bathing the cockpit in a red light of imminent danger. The distance between Cold War posturing and hot war has just collapsed to less than 500 feet of freezing air. Hammer doesn't flinch. He reacts with the muscle memory of 1,000 simulator hours. Music on, he calls out his thumb, jamming the electronic countermeasures ECM switch forward. The CF-18's internal jammer blasts a barrage of electronic noise at the Tu-95, attempting to confuse its fire control radar. Simultaneously, he snaps the stick hard right, rolling 90 degrees and pulling 5 Gs. The Hornet shudders as it bleeds energy to break the lock, sliding out of the kill box behind the bomber's tail turret. The RWR warble dies instantly. The message has been sent. We know what you are doing and we are not a target. But the engagement isn't over. It's just beginning. Now it's time for the headbutt. This is the unspoken language of aerial policing. Hammer pushes the throttles to the stops, engaging the afterburners. The CF-18 accelerates past the lumbering bomber, climbing slightly above its flight path. Then he cuts sharply across the Tu-95's nose. The violent wake turbulence from his jet wash slams into the Russian bomber like a physical blow, rattling the airframe and forcing the Russian pilots to fight the yoke just to keep their wings level. It is a kinetic warning shot, a thump that says, "Turn around, or the next pass won't be just air." As the Hornet pulls up into the vertical to regain energy, Hammer checks his 6 o'clock and his blood runs cold. Emerging from the cloud layer 1,000 feet above a dark, sleek shape peels off diving to sandwich him. It's a Su-35S Flanker-E, the deadliest air superiority fighter in the Russian inventory. The bomber was just the bait. The flanker had been ghosting the Tu-95, hiding in its radar shadow or the storm clouds, waiting for the Canadian interceptor to commit. Now it's a 2-on-1 dogfight in the freezing dark. The flanker executes a lazy barrel roll over the Hornet, flashing its full load of air-to-air missiles R-77S and R-73S under its wings. It's a flex, a show of force designed to say, "We own this sky." Hammer is flying a jet built in the ATS against a super maneuverable killer from the 2010s. The math is bad, but the Canadian pilot has one advantage. He is angry, and he is defending his home turf. The encounter over the Beaufort Sea is a study in contrasts, 1950s brute force meeting 1980s engineering and 2010s agility. To understand Hammer's predicament, we have to look under the aluminum skin. First, the Tu-95 milliseconds bear. It looks like a museum piece, but it is a master of physics. Its 4 Kuznetsov NK-12 engines drive massive contra-rotating propellers that spin so fast, their tips break the sound barrier continuously. This creates a unique acoustic signature that submarines can hear underwater, but it also allows the bomber to fly at jet speeds, 500 knots, with turboprop fuel efficiency. Its real danger, however, is not the tailgun, it's the payload. The bear is a truck for the cage. CF-101 cruise missile, a stealthy nuclear-capable weapon with a range of over 5,000 kilometers. The Bear doesn't need to fly over Canadian soil to destroy a city, it just needs to reach the launch basket over the Arctic. Second, the Su-35S Flanker E. This is the apex predator of the Russian aerospace forces. Unlike the CF-18, which relies on aerodynamics alone to turn the Su-35 has thrust vectoring controlled TVC nozzles on its engines. It can point its nose in a direction it isn't flying, executing maneuvers like the Pugachev's Cobra that defy conventional physics. In a visual dogfight within visual range SAWVR, this allows the flanker to bring its nose and its weapons to bear on a target in ways the Hornet simply cannot match. It also carries the Irbis-E passive electronically scanned array radar and a powerful infrared search and track IRST sensor, meaning it can theoretically spot and track the Hornet by its engine heat alone, without ever turning on a B radar to give away its own position. Finally, the CF-188 Hornet. It is the underdog. The airframes are tired, having flown past their original design life. Its radar, the AN/APG-73, is mechanically scanned a generation behind the electronic eyes of the Su-35. However, the Hornet has one ace up its sleeve: high alpha angle of attack capability. At low speeds, the Hornet is incredibly nose-pointable. In a knife fight in a phone booth, a slow-turning merge, a skilled Canadian pilot can leverage the Hornet's leading-edge extensions, LEX, to stay inside the flanker's turning circle just long enough to get a shot. But technologically, it is fighting an uphill battle. Hammer is relying on tactics, aggression, and the hope that the Russian pilot is less disciplined than his machine is capable. At 20 miles from the sovereign airspace boundary, the invisible line in the ocean that legally defines Canadian territory, the game of chicken ends. The Tu-95 lead pilot banks hard left its massive wings, catching the Arctic sunlight as it turns back toward the pole. The Su-35 escort peels off, climbing aggressively into the stratosphere, leaving a sonic boom that rattles the canopy of the CF-18 one last time. The spike on the radar warning receiver vanishes. The sky is suddenly deafeningly empty again. For Hammer, the adrenaline crash is instant. He checks his fuel state, 2,500 pounds remaining, just enough to rendezvous with the Polaris tanker if the winds hold. But the silence in the cockpit brings a heavier realization. This wasn't a victory, it was a data point. By forcing the Canadians to scramble in a blizzard, to light up their fire control radars and to push their aging jets to the red line, the Russians have gathered terabytes of electronic intelligence. They now know exactly how long it takes for a cold engine at Cold Lake to become a hot missile over the Beaufort Sea. They know the pulse repetition frequency of the CF-18's radar in a high-stress environment. The strategic message is clear: the Arctic is no longer a buffer, it is a contested flank. For the Royal Canadian Air Force, this intercept is another tick mark on airframes that were built when the Soviet Union still existed. Every high G turn, every afterburner launch, cracks the microscopic structure of the metal a little more. The CF-18 fleet is dying a slow death by fatigue, held together by the sheer wizardry of maintenance crews working in sub-zero hangars. The arrival of the F-35 Lightning II cannot come fast enough. Until then, the defense of North America rests on 40-year-old aluminum and the pilots who are willing to fly it into the teeth of a storm, knowing that next time the Russians might not turn back at the 12-mile line. As the CF-18 Hornets touch down at Cold Lake, their tires screeching against the icy runway, the sun is just beginning to crack the horizon. The pilots taxi back to the hardened shelters, the massive engines spinning down into a whining silence. Inside the mess hall, the coffee is still warm, and the news on the television is talking about politics or sports, oblivious to the fact that less than an hour ago, 2 Canadian pilots were staring down the barrel of a nuclear-capable bomber in a blizzard. This is the invisible war of the High North. It happens while you sleep. Every intercept, every scramble, every headbutt is a silent negotiation between superpowers written in the contrails of jets. The Russians were testing the fence, looking for a weak link in the NORAD chain. Today, they found none. But the metal is tired, the pilots are tired, and the bears will be back. Peace isn't free. It is a subscription service paid for in jet fuel stress fractures and the unwavering resolve of the men and women standing guard at the edge of the world. If you want to know exactly how the incoming F-35 fleet will change this equation, or why the Arctic is becoming the next great battlefield, hit that subscribe button. We're watching the skies, so you don't have to. Bye for now.